Hello, my name is Yusra. I'm a PhD student at the CISPA Helmholtz Center in Germany. In this talk, I'm going to discuss the effects of timing and rationales on users' runtime permission decisions. This is a joint work with my co-authors Michael, and my advisor Sven. Smartphones have rapidly evolved in recent years to store and share some of our most private and sensitive data. They do not only store our contacts, but the places we frequent, the messages we send, and the pictures we take. To give users some control over what the apps on their phone can access, these sensitive resources are protected with permissions that the user can grant or deny to the requesting app. In the current permission model of Android, permissions are requested at runtime. This means that while the user is interacting with the app might request a permission for which the user needs to make a decision. In this context, while the user decides which permissions to grant, the app developer has the freedom to decide when to request a permission and whether to provide explanations as to how and why the permission-protected resource is needed. The timing of permission requests and the accompanying rationales then form kind of a communication channel from the app developer to the user to provide the user with additional contextual information. Based on the received information, the user then ideally should make an informed permission decision. Depending on timing and rationales, there are 4 different permission request strategies. Either the permission is requested upfront at app launch, or in context when the access to the permission-protected resource is needed. For both upfront and in context requests, the app developer also can provide a rational message. Since the runtime permission model of Android allows developers to request permissions using different permission request strategies, the question now is, how should developers request permissions to maximize the benefits of the runtime permission model? In this work, we focused on the 2 variable factors of this model. More specifically, we aimed to understand the effect of timing, rationales, and their interaction on users' runtime permission decision, and also on their evaluation of their decision to infer whether this decision was made according to users' individual privacy preferences in a given context. Later in this talk, I will also discuss how our findings fit to Google's guidelines on how developers should request permissions, and also how they fit into a more general context. To answer our research question, we conducted an experimental user study on Amazon mTurk with 473 participants. We used an experimental study design to isolate the effects of timing and rationales from other factors that might influence users' permission decision. In this study, each participant interacted with 4 different apps, 1 for each permission request strategy. To provide a valid foundation for our user study, we conducted an empirical analysis on the top apps on Google Play to understand how developers currently request permissions and how they phrase their rationales. Based on this analysis, we selected 30 apps for the user study, and we created a standardized rationale design that was used throughout the study. Then, for each of the 30 study apps, we created 4 mockup versions. Per app, the same permission is requested, but using a different permission request strategy, resulting in a pool of 120 different app variations. Here is an example of a mockup app with its 4 variations. The same permission request is requested once upfront with rationale, upfront without rationale, in context with rationale, and in context without rationale. To get a holistic understanding of the user's perspective, we measured participants' permission decision, their clarity of the permission purpose, and their evaluation of the decision, for which we used the decision evaluation scales from the field of health psychology. These scales were originally developed to evaluate patients' decision to uptake or refuse a treatment choice. We transferred these scales to our particular setting to measure whether users made an informed permission decision, their satisfaction with their permission decision, and their perceived control over the permission decision. Also, to isolate the effects of timing and rationals, we controlled for other factors that might influence users' permission decision, such as users' perceived permission sensitivity, users' prior privacy experience, and privacy concerns. Also, we selected the study apps such that they request permissions for different purposes. Either the permission is needed for the main functionality of the app, or a visible feature or a hidden feature. So now, what can we say about the effects of timing and rationals? First, I will discuss our findings from the developer's perspective, then from that of the user. Starting with the developer, we found that requesting permissions in context and adding rationals benefit developers, as both increase grant rates. When permissions were requested in context compared to upfront, we found that the likelihood for permission to be granted increased between 3 to 7%. And when adding rationals, this likelihood increased between 11 to 15%. We also did not find an interaction between timing and rationals, which means that both effects are purely additive. Therefore, the highest grant rate is found when the permission is requested in context with rational. Now, regarding users, in this case, we found that there is an interaction between timing and rationals, which means that when rationals are present, the effect of timing is not significant. However, without rationals, we found that requesting permissions in context helped users make informed decisions and increase their clarity of the permission purpose. Regarding rationals, we found that users benefit from rationals for both upfront and in-context permission requests, as the presence of rationals help users make better informed decisions, increase their clarity of the permission purpose, and increase decision satisfaction. However, it is worth to note that this benefit is more prominent upfront when users may lack contextual information for decision making. Now, how do our findings fit into Google's guidelines? First, these guidelines recommend to request app-critical permissions upfront and to provide rationals for unclear permissions. Therefore, using all 4 available permission request strategies. Based on our findings, however, we suggest to limit developers' choice to 2 strategies only. Because rationals benefit both developers and users, we suggest that rationals should always be provided. With this simplification, we expect to keep grant rates at a high level and at the same time make users more comfortable with their permission decision. However, even with our simplification, these guidelines still put the burden on developers to decide when to request permissions. In our study, we also found that a large proportion of the empirical variance in our outcome variables could be explained by the individual differences between users. For example, these individual differences account for 49% of the variance in permission decision. This means that although we controlled for many individual factors, there are users who tend to grant permissions more than others, and in our study, we found that this tendency is quite stable. Therefore, instead of a strategy that puts the burden on developers to decide for all users, our intuitive deduction is to provide a solution that supports users' individuality. This could be realized through customizable permission requests. For example, using a system setting, the users can define when they would like to see permission requests and whether they prefer to see rationals. With this consistent approach, users will not be surprised by permission requests they do not expect. In fact, we think that the effort in providing rationals and context timing for all permission requests is manageable for developers and worth the effort for the benefit of the user. In our study, we also found that participants had a misconception about the origin of the rational message. 37% of our participants thought that the rational message originated from the operating system. Therefore, we recommend to add some indication that the rational message actually belongs to the app developer. For example, by using a prefix such as app name says preceding a rational message. Concluding my talk, In this work, we found that users made better informed decisions and were more satisfied with their decisions when provided with transparency, in the form of rationales and to a lesser extent by requesting permissions in the appropriate context. This finding is also in line with previous work in other domains as well, such as in the domain of privacy policies and browser security warning messages. Therefore, we recommend that rationale should always be provided, be it for runtime permission requests or other security and privacy critical decisions. However, how these rationales should look like and what they should contain is system dependent and part of future work. Thank you so much for listening.